If you're a Jimmy Page fan, or a Gary Moore fan, or an Eddie Van Halen fan, or a Les Paul fan, you have found the right video, because we're going to talk about all of those guitarists and we're going to let them speak for themselves. So let's get started right now by listening to something that Jimmy Page had to say about Eddie Van Halen and his playing.
Well, what do you think of the music and the guitar players today?
Well, for instance,
one of them.
Well, for instance, like Eddie Van Halen's got I know, right? I mean, Eddie Van Halen's got an amazing technique, all this sort of hammering on and everything. Well, I can't do that, but you know, at least they're stretching the horizons and everything, you know, which is great, fantastic.
Alright, so the person asking the questions in that clip is Les Paul, and if you don't know who Les Paul is, shame on you, go look him up. So Jimmy Page's answer about who is pushing frontiers of the guitar and his naming of Eddie Van Halen is interesting, because if you're a fan of Eddie or Jimmy, you probably know that Eddie Van Halen had some very not so nice things to say about Jimmy Page, particularly in terms of Jimmy Page's live playing. Eddie Van Halen is on record saying that while he thought Jimmy Page was a really good producer, his live playing was sloppy and uninspired. He also is on record saying that Jimmy Page is the guitar player who gave him the inspiration for what became his tapping technique, his signature technique. And I have a video on that exact topic in the archives if you want to look it up. Alright, now the reason that I mention all of this, including Eddie's tapping technique, is because it's very important in regard to what Jimmy Page said in that audio clip. He said that pushing the frontiers forward, discovering new things, is what he saw in Eddie Van Halen. And I don't think that he just meant the technique, but he did specifically mention the tapping technique. Now, since Eddie Van Halen took over the world back in the day, every guitarist that's come up and followed in his footsteps has either tried to perfect or expand on the tapping technique, or they've gone way out of their way to try to come up with some kind of similar technique or gimmick. So starting with someone like Jeff Watson back in the day of Night Ranger, he was doing the 8-fingered technique where he was tapping but playing more like a piano player on the guitar. Then you get players like Steve Vai, who's attempted to do just about every possible physical technique on a guitar that you can do in search for something novel and exciting like the tapping technique. And you've got guitarist after guitarist after guitarist doing crazy things to try to find different applications of their fingers, or different use of the whammy bar, or different this or that and the other, to try to find a technique that will get them the same kind of brilliant inventiveness that Eddie Van Halen had. And I think that is not the direction that musicians should be choosing to go in, and that's not what made Van Halen great. So what I want you to do now is listen to a clip of Gary Moore talking about what it takes to become a great guitar player. Let's listen in to what Gary Moore had to say.
So yeah, I would say just take a simple phrase and learn it, and just go over it and play it really slowly, but really listen to what you're playing. Don't just say, right, yeah, that's the notes and I've got it now. You've actually got to really get into it and say, well, how am I going to play it? How's this going to sound like me? How am I going to put this across? What's going to give it that kind of, how's it going to sound like it's saying something? Otherwise it is just notes.
So basically what Gary Moore is saying in that clip is that if you want to be a good guitar player, you shouldn't try to play faster. You shouldn't try to play more complicated licks. What you should do is you should slow down, focus on finding your self-identity and your voice. So let's go back and think about each of the guitarists that are being featured in this video. Let's start with Les Paul. Les Paul was probably the first guitarist in American music to recognize the role of what we now call the guitar hero. Not only did he invent and or help to pioneer the electric guitar and the science of multi-tracking, he was also a great player himself, and he helped guitar come out of the background of music in America and into the foreground by following guitarists such as Django Reinhardt. Now, Gary Moore is well known for being a master of all guitar styles, but at the same time, if you heard him play a single 4-note solo in the 12-bar blues song, you would know that it's Gary Moore, because he also had really reached down and found his own personality on the instrument. Jimmy Page, of course, not only did he find his own character and self-expression on the instrument, he paved the way for hundreds and hundreds of other guitarists to do the same thing. And finally, when we're talking about Eddie Van Halen, there is no guitarist that I can think of who more personifies the idea of character and uniqueness and self-expression than Eddie. So what each of these 4 guitarists have in common is that they all followed their own path, they followed their own imagination, they followed their own soul. And while they might have sat around and studied other guitar players, that's not where they ended. They started by studying other guitarists, but they went on to find their own voices. And I think that this is not a matter of discovering technique. It's not a matter of perfecting technique. It's actually just a matter of being able to be comfortable enough with the instrument to speak through it the way that you speak through your own voice, or in fact speak more fully through the instrument than you do with your own voice. Now, I'm probably going to do videos on this same topic in the future because I think it's really important. I see a lot of musicians out there that are in a big hurry to play super fast or to play super complicated licks, but they don't have any personality. They don't have any character. They're not trying to find any emotion in what they're playing. And I think that this is precisely the wrong way to go about attaining a voice on the guitar. This is what I think, but what really matters is what you think. So if you have an idea about this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please drop it in the section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.
I think there are the sort of the gunslinger guitarists whose it's sort of the fastest draw in the West mentality, and then there's the sidemen, who are really about supporting the singer and playing the songs and trying to, make the whole thing mesh together. And I really think of myself more as that sideman kind of guitar player. I think of Keith Richards in that same mold. And I have to say my favourite guitar players are that type. The Guitar Olympics.
Not the show-off.
Well,
not the ones who aren't part of the band, not the ones who are going off in a solo.
Pete is the side man, even though he's the front man in a lot of people's book. He's playing the songs. It's all about getting the song across, supporting the singer.